Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something pretty profound. You know, when we scroll through global news, it's so easy to just read the big, bold headlines, right? Words like ceasefire or safe zones get blasted everywhere, and that creates this very specific expectation of what's happening on the ground. But what happens when the actual lived reality of the people walking those streets completely contradicts what the rest of the world is being told? In this explainer, we're unpacking first-hand accounts straight from residents inside Gaza to figure out what daily survival, medical access, and the emotional toll literally look like right now.
So, let's just jump right into this massive disconnect. Take a look at this direct quote from a local resident, a father who's actually dealing with his own injuries right now. When he's asked about all those international reports saying the conflict is over, his response is, well, it's incredibly blunt. He says, if they lived in Gaza, they would know it hasn't ended. He points out that hearing the sound of bullets isn't some rare event. It's a daily, totally normal occurrence for them. And honestly, this sets the baseline for everything we're about to talk about. We're looking at a community that feels the outside world has totally misread their day-to-day reality.
And this brings us to the core contrast we're exploring today. On one side, you have this widespread global narrative, reports talking about a ceasefire. But on the flip side, the source material documents a vastly different reality. Local accounts confirm that no, bombings are absolutely still ongoing. On top of that, residents report that roughly 60% of the strip is currently occupied, which means their movement is essentially paralyzed. They're squeezed into these shrinking spaces where the sounds of shootings and airstrikes are just the soundtrack to their mornings. This gap between the headlines and the ground isn't just semantics, you guys. It totally dictates their daily survival.
Okay, so how do you survive under these conditions? When we break down basic human needs, we see this absolute reliance on completely shattered infrastructure. For food, families obviously aren't popping down to the grocery store. They rely entirely on these communal kitchens, known locally as takia. And there's no menu. It's whatever happens to be available that day. Maybe it's lentils, maybe it's rice, always followed by these agonizingly long waits just to secure a single piece of bread for breakfast. And water? Forget about turning on a tap. Residents describe making these dangerous, exhausting treks to specific areas, like a place called Al-Jalaa, literally just to fetch enough clean water to make it through the day. Every single basic necessity is a massive logistical hurdle.
And you have to think about how this completely redefines childhood. Take Hussein, for example. He's a third grader. Just picture what a typical morning commute to school looks like for an 8-year-old in your life. For Hussein, his attempt to just go get an education is disrupted by active morning airstrikes. When someone asks him if the war is over, this young kid points out that actually they were bombing just this morning and the day before, hitting nearby buildings. Schools are besieged, the whole environment is completely destabilized, and a child's fundamental right to learn is just constantly hijacked by military strikes.
Now, I want you to consider the number 11. In a single, recent strike documented in our sources, 11 civilians were injured, alongside 3 martyrs. But here's the detail that really hits hard. This strike happened in an area internationally classified as a safe zone, right? An area specifically designated as out of harm's way. When areas globally defined as safe are still the sites of civilian casualties, it completely shatters any lingering sense of security for the people desperately trying to find refuge there. Which leads us straight into the medical reality. Because obviously when you have casualties in these zones, you need hospitals. But the source material outlines a completely crippled medical infrastructure. Injured survivors report being totally trapped. Remember that father we quoted earlier? He's walking with a severe limp because he desperately needs a joint replacement surgery, but he's entirely unable to leave the area to get it. His wife suffered an eye injury. People are literally walking around with untreated shrapnel, navigating the rubble of their homes, simply because the medical bottlenecks, the lack of supplies, and the sheer inability to travel make adequate care practically impossible. To really put this medical crisis into perspective, the footage features one of the most harrowing accounts in the entire source material. That same injured father explains what his young daughter is going through. She survived being shot 7 times. 7. Medical workers managed to remove 4 of those bullets, but she is currently living with 3 bullets still trapped inside her back. Let that sink in. A child is walking around with bullets lodged in her body simply because they cannot access the advanced surgical treatment needed to safely take them out. It's a really stark reminder of how this collapse of medical access prolongs the physical trauma indefinitely. But beyond the physical devastation, we absolutely have to talk about the psychological toll. The footage introduces this incredibly powerful Arabic word, kahar. It essentially translates to this infinite feeling of being sad, angry, and totally lost, all at the exact same time.
And this isn't just a fleeting emotion. Residents use this specific term to describe the inescapable, suffocating psychological environment they wake up to every single day. I mean, when your home is destroyed, your family is injured, and you're waiting in line for hours for lentils while drones buzz overhead, kahar is the word that captures that profound, heavy trauma. And this heavy emotional burden leads us right into a critical question presented in the sources. What is the long-term impact on these fragmented families? We've covered the physical injuries and the ruined buildings, but what happens when the people you love most just vanish? How do you even maintain any semblance of mental health when you're trapped in this agonizing state of uncertainty, not knowing if a detained or missing relative is alive, injured, or worse?
Well, the source material documents a local mother's visceral reaction to news reports about execution laws affecting prisoners, and the emotional impact is just staggering. She describes waking up in profound shock, pacing through completely sleepless nights. Her husband has been missing for over 2.5 months, and she has had zero information about where he is. She watches her daughters desperately scouring the internet, crying, trying to find any news of their father. She says that feeling of kahar is totally indescribable. She just wants to see her family, whether they're imprisoned or martyred, just to end the absolute torment of not knowing.
Yet despite all these overwhelming accounts of destruction and loss and kahar, the footage actually concludes with this really fascinating moment of grounding resilience. The camera turns to the beach, and we hear this quote, "Israel cannot destroy the sea." For the residents, amidst all the broken concrete and the daily grind for basic bread and water, the sea remains this constant anchor. It doesn't cost money to look at. It provides a rare, indestructible refuge, a place where people can go, sit with their friends, find a brief moment of peace, and look out at a horizon that hasn't been altered by the conflict.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. We started by looking at the expectation of a ceasefire versus the reality of daily bombings, medical crises, and profound psychological trauma. When the lived reality contrasts so drastically with what the rest of the world is told, how can the global community ever truly understand or help heal these unseen wounds? If the outside world believes the crisis is over, the urgency to provide critical medical aid, like, say, removing those 3 bullets from a little girl's back, begins to fade. Understanding this gap is step 1. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.